Okay, the headlines, and this time around in line with what's last days of Black History Month every year in February. I spoke with three people. Courtenay Harewood, I asked him what this means to him. I also had the pleasure of speaking with Nadia Asri, organization in Belgium called ENAR, European Network Against Racism. I just saw a couple of days ago press release. She is the contributing author of the most recent ENAR report addressing the links between climate, justice, and racism. And I thought it was very interesting. Now, last but certainly not least, I did an interview with Dr. Jak Beula. I was working with him before on a statue for the NHS nurses that came here from the Commonwealth countries. He is involved in what I believe is a very positive initiative. He is erecting statues, placing blue plaques, and in particular, Black history-themed commemorative plaques. These highlight the contribution of people of Black African descent to societies, to global societies, and this in order for the entire world to discover these pioneering Black figures. Let's start with what Wikipedia has to say about Black History Month. It's an annual observance originating in the United States, but more recently observed in Germany, in Canada, in Ireland, and in the United Kingdom.
No, I think Black History Month is important because it allows us to balance the narrative, if nothing else. There are dangers in that you can overemphasize and de-emphasize certain things. And again, you can play into the political narrative that is current and only look at things which complement what you want to see and hear. And that's from both of, from the Black political position or Black historic position, where you're trying to assert your humanity and come into history, as it were. So coming into history, I think, is a good thing.
Okay, I asked both Jak and I asked Courtenay about the blue plaques, the Black history-themed commemorative plaques. As I mentioned, I think it's very positive because they are really highlighting people that have made an impact on society, a massive difference to society, from artists to inventors. And why do they think that is important?
It's very important to put Black plaques and blue plaques and plaques to everybody, not just African people of African descent, everybody, so we can all celebrate the pieces of the jigsaw that makes us who we are, which makes up global history.
And it's important because, human beings are spirit. We are all spirits. We bring things to the table, whether we know it or not, some of us more than others. And in some instances, the contributions, and that's what we're talking about, the contributions of people of African descent have brought real positive change to wide societies, not only to their own communities. And I think that's the important thing, to weave those narratives into the big one.
Now, Jak, can you tell me which ones have been done already, or indeed in this particular month, Black History Month?
So to date we have, to date we've done 70 plaques, but this month, this is 2022, this is February 2022, we've already done 3 plaques in London. This week we did a plaque to Queen Marie-Louise, who's the first and only Queen of Haiti. So we honored her in Marylebone. And we've done 2 plaques previously. Last month, we did a plaque to Henry VIII's trumpeter, a man by the name of John Blank. And our first plaque this year was to the Prince of Brixton, Darcus Howe.
Okay, Jak, you started in the UK. You're now doing this internationally, already starting in the US, going to Africa as well, and all over Europe. Why are you doing that?
It's so important. It's so important that people of African descent are recognized in public realm all over the world.
The narrative about the impact that people of Black African heritage have had on societies is very, very important, because in many instances, in spite of the difficulties that people of African descent have faced, they've actually brought positive inputs into the society which have changed things for the better.
Not just here in London, not just in Wales, which is our first international plaque, but all over the world. Because what we are doing in the 21st century, in this millennium, is trying to get people to come together, to recognize people's differences and appreciate their contribution. And doing plaques all over the world is a wonderful way of trying to achieve that narrative. that communication, that conversation.
Okay, we have Nadia Asri of the European Network Against Racism. That's ENAR in short. And she's the contributing author of the recent report with the title, "The Climate Crisis is a Colonial Capitalist Crisis. Experiences, Responses, and Steps Towards Decolonizing Climate Action." And this was a new one for me, very intriguing, I thought. I haven't made that link myself. In the press release, it said that rich countries are responsible for more than 70% of historical emissions. Poor countries, however, in the global south, have been hit hardest by global climate crisis and have less resources to adapt to fend off its worst consequences. And I totally agree with that. Now, I asked Nadia, you say in your press release that you want the climate justice movements, the local authorities, national governments, and the European policymakers to reflect on the historical conditions that have caused the climate crisis. And I asked Nadia to explain in layman's terms what that means and why does she want them to reflect on the historical conditions.
So to put this more simply, what we mean and what it means is that kind of formerly colonized lands and populations are still suffering the dynamics and impacts of colonization, and that those impacts are made worse by the climate crisis. And this is what we term neo-colonialism in the report, to kind of reflect that despite the fact that colonial occupying forces were driven out of global south countries, largely by very powerful resistance movements in the 20th century, colonial dynamics endure. They just look different, but they endure through policies, practices, and structures. Like you said, you're Dutch, and we draw an inherent link between neocolonialism and capitalism. And one of the examples that we use to kind of illustrate this is that the Amsterdam Stock Exchange had shares in the two first public companies ever, the Dutch East India and Dutch West India companies. And that these companies were very kind of an important parts of the extractive colonial project in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so capitalism has kind of provided a social and economic framework to drive for profit at all costs, whether that cost be to life, whether that cost be to health, or whether that cost be to the planet. If we want our climate action to be targeted and efficient and impactful, then historicism is key, I think. So I hope.
Okay, then looking at their own site, at the report, I found the approach a little bit more radical, bordering a little bit on socialism, communism. I consider myself the opposite, as a matter of fact, so that part bothered me a little bit.
And firstly, allow me to say that the report has been doing really well. It's been really well received over the past few days. We've had some really positive reactions, not only kind of from civil society, but also from activists and academics and policymakers who are working on the European Green New Deal. And I think if it's radical, to call for people to have access to safe and healthy and happy environments to live in, perhaps, perhaps we are radical, but I don't think that that's, I wouldn't personally call this radical. Because there's an increasing understanding of the disproportionate impacts of climate breakdown on racialized communities. It's simply becoming more recognized, and our role as ENAR, as a civil society organization, is to be kind of involved within public debate by offering analysis and data about what's going on the ground, so that policymakers can make the most informed decisions possible. And what our research is telling us is that capitalism as a mode of production is leading to terrible climate disruption and seriously negative impacts on racialized communities, which are the communities that as ENAR we focus on.